You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. Something deeper, a fatigue that lives in your chest, quiet and heavy, like you've been carrying something for so long you've forgotten it isn't yours. Look around your life, not the surface of it, the furniture, the schedule, the routines you perform on autopilot. Look underneath, at the relationships that drain before they give, the habits you defend but don't believe in, the version of yourself you keep performing for people who never really asked you to. Most people, when they feel this way, go looking for something new, a new plan, a new goal, a new reason to push harder. The Stoics would call that a misdiagnosis. Marcus Aurelius didn't find his clarity by adding more to his life. He found it by becoming ruthlessly honest about what no longer belonged there. Peace isn't hiding behind something you haven't discovered yet. It's waiting underneath everything you need to remove. This isn't about burning your life down. No dramatic exits, no righteous anger. What's coming is quieter than that, and far more powerful. It's a calm, deliberate subtraction. 20 things that are stealing your energy, your time, your sense of self. 20 things you can begin releasing, not in fury, but in dignity, if you're ready to start letting go. Drop the word less in the comments. It takes 1 second, and it might be the first thing you release today. You don't need more. You need less. Let's begin. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates slowly, politely, in the background of your life, until one day you realize that the version of you that used to feel light and clear has been buried under years of things you never consciously chose to keep. The Stoics had a name for the opposite of this feeling. They called it autarkia, a self-sufficiency so complete that nothing external could determine your inner state, not the opinions of others, not the weight of the past, not the noise of a world that profits from your distraction. To live with autarkia wasn't to be cold or disconnected. It was to be free, genuinely, quietly free, because you had stopped depending on the wrong things for your sense of worth. That kind of freedom doesn't come from adding, it comes from removing, and it starts with the weight you've been carrying the longest. 1. The relationships that only flow one way. You know the ones. The conversations where you leave feeling smaller than when you arrived. The friendships where you're always the one reaching out, always the one adjusting, always the one absorbing someone else's chaos while your own needs go quietly unmet. You've probably told yourself it's fine, that they're going through something, that loyalty means staying regardless of cost. But Seneca was clear about this, perhaps uncomfortably so. He wrote that we should be careful about who we associate with, because we inevitably absorb the character of those around us, not as a judgment of their worth, but as an honest observation about energy. Some people, through no malice of their own, are simply taking more than they give, and you, through no fault of your own, have been letting it happen. Eliminating one-sided relationships doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It means you start caring honestly, including about yourself. Some of these relationships don't need to end dramatically. They simply need to be quietly deprioritized. Less energy out, less availability, a slow, respectful stepping back that creates room for connections that actually restore you. The people who belong in your life will rise to meet you. The ones who only showed up because you made it easy, they'll fade, and you'll feel the difference immediately. 2. The need to explain yourself. At some point you started believing that your choices required justification, that if you said no, you owed someone a reason, that if you changed your mind, you needed to defend the shift, that if your values evolved, You had to present a full accounting of how and why to anyone who asked, and even to some who didn't. This is one of the quietest and most exhausting drains on a person's energy. The constant internal labor of pre-explaining, of softening your truth so others find it more digestible, of shrinking your decisions down to something that won't make anyone uncomfortable. Epictetus was direct about this. What other people think of your choices is not in your control, and more importantly, it is not your responsibility. You are not obligated to make your life legible to everyone who encounters it. Your boundaries don't need footnotes. Your no doesn't need a cover letter. When you stop explaining yourself compulsively, something interesting happens. You realize how much mental energy that habit was consuming. Entire conversations you were having in your head, anticipating objections, rehearsing justifications, simply stop. The silence that replaces them isn't emptiness, it's clarity. Practice saying less, not coldly, not arrogantly, but with the calm confidence of someone who knows their own reasons and doesn't need external validation to feel secure in them. That confidence, once found, is remarkably hard to take away. 3. The version of success that was never really yours. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a definition of success that you never actually chose. Maybe it came from your parents, the career they imagined for you, the stability they prized because they'd lived without it. Maybe it came from your culture, your school, your social circle, the particular slice of the internet you spent too many hours consuming. Whatever the source, it arrived early enough and quietly enough that you mistook it for your own ambition. And so you've been chasing it, working toward a version of a good life that, when you're honest in the quiet hours, doesn't actually excite you. Hitting milestones that look impressive from the outside, but feel strangely hollow once you're standing inside them. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the seduction of external validation, the applause of the crowd, the titles, the markers of status. He understood it because he had all of it and still spent his private journals wrestling with what actually mattered. His conclusion, returned to again and again, was that the only success worth pursuing is the one aligned with your values. Not your inherited values, your examined ones. This elimination is one of the most difficult because it requires you to sit in uncertainty for a while, to unlearn someone else's definition before you've fully written your own. But that uncertainty is not a crisis, it's the beginning of something genuine. You can't build a life that fits you while you're still wearing someone else's blueprint. 4. Chronic overstimulation. Your nervous system is not designed for the volume of input your modern life delivers to it. The notifications, the news cycle, the social feeds, the podcasts filling every silent moment, the emails arriving before you've finished your first cup of coffee. None of this existed for most of human history, and your brain has not had time to adapt. What chronic overstimulation does beyond the obvious exhaustion is more insidious. It destroys your capacity for reflection. And without reflection, you cannot make genuine choices. You can only react. You move through your days responding to the loudest stimulus rather than living from any internal compass. You become, in a very real sense, easier to manipulate by algorithms, by other people's urgency, by the general noise of a world that benefits from your distraction. The Stoics practiced what we might now call deliberate silence, not the absence of thought, but the creation of space for thought that is actually yours. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not for publication, but as a private discipline, a daily act of returning to himself amid the noise of ruling an empire. You don't need to rule an empire to benefit from the same practice. You need to turn things off, regularly, deliberately, without guilt. The discomfort you feel in the first minutes of genuine quiet is not boredom, it's withdrawal. Push through it. What's on the other side is your own mind, waiting to be heard. 5. The habit of postponing your own life. When things settle down, when I have more money, when the kids are older, when I feel ready. You've said some version of this, probably more times than you'd like to count. And each time it felt reasonable, responsible even, like you were being appropriately cautious about a life that deserved care. But Seneca wrote something about this that is difficult to read and impossible to forget. He said that we act as though life is long and time is abundant, when in truth we waste so much of it, not in grand disasters, but in quiet postponements, in waiting for a permission that was never coming, in treating our own lives as a dress rehearsal for some future version of living that never quite arrives. The habit of postponing your own life is not caution. It is, at its root, a fear of commitment to your own desires, your own values, your own choices. Because if you begin, you can fail. If you wait, you remain safely hypothetical. Eliminate the waiting, not by leaping recklessly into chaos, but by identifying one thing, just one, that you have been deferring to some imagined future and beginning it now, in whatever small form is available to you. The version of your life that's waiting for perfect conditions will wait forever. The version that starts imperfectly today at least gets lived. There's a particular cruelty in noise, the way it mimics meaning. A full calendar feels like a purposeful life. A crowded social feed feels like connection. Constant busyness feels like progress. But strip away the volume, and what you're often left with is a person who has been very active and gone almost nowhere. The Stoics were deeply suspicious of noise, not because they were antisocial or ascetic by temperament, but because they understood something that modern life makes very easy to forget. Most of what competes for your attention is not actually important. The Stoic practice of distinguishing between what is up to us and what is not was, at its core, a practice of filtering, of refusing to give equal weight to everything that presented itself as urgent. What follows are 5 of the most common forms of noise that people mistake for living. 6. Other people's opinions of your choices. This one runs deep. Deeper than most people realize until they sit quietly with it. The fear of being judged, misunderstood, criticized, dismissed, shapes an enormous number of daily decisions for the average person. What to wear, what to say, which path to take, which dreams to admit to, which version of yourself to present in which room. You have probably spent more time and energy managing other people's perceptions of you than you have spent actually building the life you want. That's not a character flaw. It's a very human response to a very real social pressure, but it is, nonetheless, a profound waste of the one resource you cannot recover: time. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme repeatedly throughout his meditations, perhaps because as an emperor he was surrounded by opinion on all sides. His conclusion was always the same, that the good opinion of others is neither something you can fully control, nor something that should determine your inner life. He wrote about the brevity of fame, the quickness with which even celebrated people are forgotten, and the freedom that comes from truly internalizing that truth. When you stop building your life around the approval of others, you don't become selfish, you become honest. And an honest life, one actually aligned with your values, is far more interesting, far more sustainable, and far more worthy of the time it takes to live it. 7. Guilt over things you cannot change. Guilt, in its healthy form, is a signal, a brief, useful discomfort that tells you something needs attention or repair. Acknowledge it, act on it where you can, and let it go. That is its function. That is all it was ever meant to do. What most people do instead is hold on to guilt long past its usefulness, replaying past decisions in an endless internal tribunal where the verdict never changes and the sentence never ends. You keep yourself locked in a courtroom of your own making, relitigating choices made by a version of you that had different information, different maturity, different circumstances. Seneca wrote that we suffer more from imagination than from reality, and guilt is perhaps the clearest example of this truth. The event is over. The harm, if there was harm, is done. The only thing your continued guilt is affecting is your present quality of life. It is not making amends. It is not repairing damage. It is simply costing you peace without purchasing anything of value. This does not mean you should be without conscience. It means you should use your conscience wisely, as a compass for future action, not a chain attached to past mistakes. Forgive yourself with the same generosity you would extend to someone you love who made the same error. Then move. Forward is the only direction available. 8. The compulsive need to stay informed about everything. There is a version of staying informed that is genuinely valuable, knowing what affects your community, your health, the people you love, the decisions you need to make. And then there is the version that most people actually practice, an anxious, compulsive consumption of every development, in every story, in every corner of the world, all day, every day, without end or filter. The second version does not make you more informed in any meaningful sense. It makes you more anxious. It floods your system with events you cannot influence, tragedies you cannot remedy, outrage you cannot channel productively. And it does so constantly in real time with the full persuasive architecture of platforms designed to keep you reading, reacting, and returning. The Stoics were careful about what they let into their minds because they understood that the mind becomes what it repeatedly encounters. If you spend your mornings absorbing catastrophe, your nervous system will spend the day in a low-grade state of alarm. That alarm is not clarity, it is noise dressed as awareness. Cure it ruthlessly. Read deeply rather than broadly. Give your attention to sources that inform without inflaming. And then, this is the part most people resist, allow yourself to not know things. Trust that what genuinely requires your attention will find you. The rest is mostly static. 9. Comparison as a daily practice. Somewhere right now, someone has more than you. A nicer home, a more impressive career, a relationship that looks more fulfilling, a body that looks more cared for, a life that from the outside appears to be running more smoothly than yours. You know this. You check, often without meaning to, multiple times a day, a quick scroll, a casual browse, an innocent glance at someone else's highlight reel. And each time, something small deflates in you. It's not dramatic. It's just a quiet, persistent erosion of your satisfaction with your own life. Not because your life has gotten worse, but because you've measured it against an impossible standard constructed from the best moments of other people's presentations. Epictetus was unambiguous about this. Desire for what others have is a guaranteed path to misery, because it places your happiness in conditions that are entirely outside your control. You cannot control what others achieve, possess, or display. You can only control your own choices, your own efforts, your own values. When comparison pulls your eyes outward, it steals your attention from the only arena where you have any actual power. This doesn't mean you can't admire others or draw inspiration from them. It means you notice when admiration has quietly become measurement, when inspiration has quietly become inadequacy, and you redirect, not forcefully, just calmly, repeatedly, back to your own work, your own life, your own sufficient and singular path. 10. Saying yes when you mean no. Every time you say yes to something you don't actually want to do, you're saying no to something else, your time, your energy, your peace, your own priorities. That trade-off is always happening, whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is only whether you're making it consciously. Most people say yes out of a complicated mixture of guilt, fear, and a genuine desire to be good and helpful. Those instincts are not wrong, but they become destructive when they are never balanced by the equally valid instinct to protect your own capacity. You cannot pour endlessly from an empty vessel, and yet that is precisely what habitual yes-saying asks you to do. The Stoics valued what they called prohairesis, the faculty of choice, the one thing that is always and entirely yours. To give that faculty away carelessly, to let other people's preferences and requests determine the shape of your days without your genuine consent, is to surrender the most distinctly human thing you possess. Learning to say no is not a personality trait you either have or don't. It is a skill, developed through practice, made easier each time you survive the momentary discomfort of disappointing someone and realize that both of you are fine. Start small, hold the line gently, and notice what becomes possible in your life when your yes actually means something, because it's no longer something you give away for free. Identity is a strange and often invisible trap, not because having a sense of self is dangerous, but because the self you once needed to become can quietly become the self you're afraid to leave behind, even when it no longer fits, no longer serves, no longer tells the truth about who you actually are. Most people carry at least one version of themselves that is essentially a historical artifact, a character assembled in response to a specific set of circumstances, pressures or wounds that no longer fully apply. The anxious overachiever who needed to perform to feel safe. The easygoing one who learned that having no needs meant never being rejected. The tough one who decided early that softness was a liability. These identities weren't mistakes, they were solutions, intelligent, adaptive responses to real situations. But you are not the same person you were when you built them, and continuing to live inside an identity that was designed for a different version of your life is, as the Stoics would say, a failure to examine. And examination, they insisted, was the beginning of everything. 11. The identity of the victim. This is a delicate one, and it deserves careful handling. There is a meaningful difference between acknowledging real harm, genuinely processing what was done to you, giving it the weight it deserves, and organizing your entire sense of self around that harm. One is healing, the other is a cage. The victim identity is seductive because it comes with a kind of permission. When your suffering explains your limitations, you are temporarily relieved of the difficult work of exceeding them. When what happened to you becomes the primary story you tell about yourself, you no longer have to grapple with who you might become beyond it. Marcus Aurelius faced extraordinary adversity, illness, betrayal, the death of children, the weight of leading a crumbling empire. He did not ignore these things, but he refused, with a quiet and remarkable stubbornness, to let them become his defining narrative. He wrote about returning to the present, to what was still possible, to what was still within his power to influence, not because the past didn't matter, but because the present was where life actually happened. What happened to you is real. It mattered. You are allowed to grieve it, name it, and feel the full weight of it. And then, when you're ready in your own time, you are also allowed to stop letting it author your future. The story of what was done to you is not the only story you get to tell. 12. The need to be right. There is a version of intelligence that never stops defending itself, that turns every conversation into a quiet competition for correctness, every disagreement into a threat to be neutralized, every concession into a small defeat. You may recognize this pattern in others. You may also, if you're honest, recognize it in yourself. The need to be right is almost never really about the facts in question. It's about identity, about a self-image so tied to being correct, being smart, being the one who knows, that being wrong feels like a kind of dissolution. And so you hold positions past the point of evidence. You argue past the point of usefulness. You win the exchange and lose the relationship, or the opportunity to learn, or the chance to actually change your mind about something that deserved changing. Epictetus asked his students to consider what they valued more, the victory of the argument or the truth of the matter, because these two things are often, inconveniently, not the same. A person who can be genuinely persuaded, who can say, "You're right, I hadn't considered that," without feeling diminished, possesses a kind of intellectual freedom that the compulsive debater never will. Let yourself be wrong sometimes. Not performatively, not as a strategy, but genuinely, as a practice of staying curious rather than defended. The person who never has to be right is free to be honest. And honesty, over time, turns out to be a far more interesting way to live than winning. 13. Performed busyness. At some point, busyness became a status symbol. To be busy is to be important. To be always in demand, always scheduled, always responding. This is what worth looks like in the modern imagination. And so people perform it, even when the performance is costing them the very things they claim to want: rest, presence, meaningful connection, time to think. Performed busyness is different from genuine engagement. Genuine engagement means you are fully present in the work that matters to you, moving at a pace that is sustainable and deliberate. Performed busyness means you are always slightly overwhelmed, always half distracted, always signaling to yourself and others that your time is valuable by ensuring there is never quite enough of it. The Stoics were deeply skeptical of activity for its own sake. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of doing less, not lazily but deliberately, as a means of doing what remains more fully. He understood that a life scattered across too many things is a life not fully lived in any of them. Ask yourself honestly, how much of your busyness is genuine and how much is performance? How much of your schedule exists because it reflects your actual priorities, and how much of it exists because a full calendar feels safer than the open space that would require you to decide what actually matters? Protect your time the way you'd protect anything precious, because it is, and no one is coming to protect it for you. 14. The old version of a relationship you've already changed. Some relationships persist not because they are currently working, but because they once did, and the memory of what they were creates a loyalty to what they are, even when what they are no longer serves either person involved. This is true of friendships that have quietly diverged. It is true of family dynamics that replay the same roles assigned decades ago, regardless of how much everyone has grown. It is true of romantic partnerships where the connection that once existed has been replaced by habit, comfort, or a shared reluctance to acknowledge what has shifted. Eliminating the old version of a relationship doesn't always mean ending it. Sometimes it means renegotiating it, having the honest, uncomfortable conversation that updates the terms, acknowledges the change, and creates space for something more genuine to develop between the people you actually are now, rather than the people you used to be. Seneca wrote about the importance of choosing friends, and we might extend this to all close relationships, not based on what they once offered, but on what they currently cultivate in you. Do the relationships you're maintaining help you become more honest, more grounded, more fully yourself? Or are they keeping you tethered to a version of your life you've already quietly moved beyond? You are allowed to love people and still acknowledge that the relationship, in its current form, is no longer helping either of you grow. 15. Self-punishment as a form of discipline. There is a pervasive and damaging belief that being hard on yourself is the same thing as having high standards. That internal harshness produces results. That if you let yourself off the hook, if you are gentle with yourself after a failure or compassionate about your own limitations, you will somehow become lazy, complacent, or less than you could be. This belief is false, and it is quietly costing you an enormous amount. Self-punishment does not create discipline, it creates shame. And shame, research and lived experience both confirm, is one of the least effective motivators for lasting change. What shame reliably produces is avoidance. The brain that expects punishment for failure will eventually find elaborate ways to avoid the activities where failure is possible, which means the very harshness you use to push yourself forward ends up creating the resistance that holds you back. Marcus Aurelius wrote with remarkable compassion about human limitation, including his own. His meditations are full of moments where he acknowledges failing to live up to his ideals and then, without extended self-flagellation, returns to what he can still do. Not because he had low standards, but because he understood that self-contempt is not the same as self-improvement. Hold yourself to high standards. Care deeply about the quality of your choices and the integrity of your character. And when you fall short, as you will because you are human, correct your course with the efficiency of a good navigator, not the cruelty of a bad judge. The former gets you where you're going, the latter keeps you anchored in what went wrong. By now, something has probably shifted. Maybe it's subtle, a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of something you've been carrying without examining. Or maybe it's more pointed, a specific face, a specific habit, a specific story about yourself that has started to feel less like identity and more like costume. Either way, you're closer to yourself than you were at the beginning of this. Not because you've added anything and you haven't, but because the process of honest subtraction has a way of creating space for what was always there, waiting beneath the noise. These final 5 eliminations are perhaps the most personal. They live closest to the center of who you are and who you're becoming. They don't require dramatic action, only a quiet, sustained willingness to stop. 16. The fear of your own silence. Most people will do almost anything to avoid sitting alone with themselves in genuine quiet. They'll reach for the phone, turn on the television, fill the space with music, podcasts, background noise, anything to avoid the particular discomfort of an unoccupied mind. And this avoidance is so normalized that it doesn't even register as avoidance, it just feels like preference. But there's something important in that discomfort. The reason silence feels difficult is not that it's empty, it's that it's full of the thoughts, feelings and truths that the noise has been helping you postpone, the unresolved tension in a relationship you haven't addressed, the question about your direction that you've been too busy to properly ask, the grief, the longing, the creative impulse, the genuine desire that keeps getting drowned out by the volume of your life. The Stoic practice of morning reflection, the daily return to the self before the world's demands began, was not incidental to their philosophy. It was central, because a person who cannot sit with themselves cannot know themselves, and a person who doesn't know themselves cannot live with any real intention. Start with 5 minutes, just 5, no phone, no input, no agenda. Sit with whatever arises. You don't have to fix it or analyze it or do anything with it. Simply allow your own mind to speak at a volume lower than everything else in your life. You may be surprised and slightly unsettled by how much it has to say. 17. Toxic positivity. The pressure to be fine. There is a particular kind of cultural pressure, prevalent and well-intentioned and quietly damaging, that says you should look on the bright side, stay positive, find the lesson, maintain your gratitude. Always, in every situation, regardless of what's actually happening. This pressure is not kindness, it is avoidance wearing kindness as a mask. Genuine emotional health is not the absence of difficult feelings. It is the capacity to experience them honestly, to let grief be grief, frustration be frustration, uncertainty be uncertainty, without either dramatizing them or suppressing them beneath a performance of relentless optimism. The Stoics were not optimists in this shallow sense. They were realists who believed that facing life as it actually was, including its losses, its injustices, its irreducible difficulties, was the only honest foundation for genuine equanimity. Negative visualization, as the Stoics practiced it, was a deliberate meditation on difficulty, not to become pessimistic, but to become honest. To stop pretending that life is uniformly manageable and to build a resilience rooted in reality rather than in the sustained fiction that everything is fine. Stop performing fine when you aren't. Not because you should broadcast your struggles to everyone, discernment matters, but because the internal performance of being okay when you're not is its own kind of exhaustion. Allow yourself the dignity of your actual experience. It is from that honest ground, and not from manufactured positivity, that real strength grows. 18. The version of yourself you perform for social media. There is a version of you that exists specifically for public consumption. Carefully assembled, strategically presented, optimized, even if you'd resist that word, for impression. This version is not a lie, exactly. It contains real elements of who you are, but it is curated in ways that the real you never is, smoothed of ambiguity, freed of contradiction, stripped of the ordinary mess that makes a human life genuinely human. The problem with maintaining this version is not that it deceives others, though it may. The deeper problem is what it does to your relationship with yourself. When you spend significant time and energy constructing and maintaining a public image, you begin, subtly and incrementally, to evaluate your actual life through the lens of how it would look presented to others. You start to live for the documentation rather than the experience. You choose the photogenic moment over the genuine one. Epictetus was clear that reputation, what others think of you, what image you project, belongs to the category of things that are not truly yours to control and therefore not worthy of organizing your life around. What is yours is your character, who you are when no one is watching, what you choose when there is no audience, how you treat people when there is nothing to gain. You don't have to delete your accounts or announce a grand withdrawal. Simply begin to notice when you're living your life and when you're staging it, and practice in small daily ways, choosing the former. The life that exists when no one is watching is the only life that's actually yours. 19. Waiting for certainty before you move. Certainty is a comfortable idea and a rare reality. Most of the significant things in life, the relationships worth building, the work worth doing, the changes worth making, come with no guarantees attached. And yet, many people treat certainty as a prerequisite for action, waiting for a confidence that can only actually be built by moving, by trying, by stepping into the uncertainty and discovering that they can navigate it. This waiting is not wisdom. It is, at its root, a sophisticated form of fear. fear dressed in the language of prudence, patience, and responsibility, so convincingly that it can be very difficult to recognize. Marcus Aurelius made decisions every day under conditions of radical uncertainty, military, political, personal. His meditations reveal not a man who had arrived at perfect clarity, but a man who had accepted imperfect clarity as the normal condition of a life lived with intention. He moved anyway. He chose anyway. He engaged with his life as it was, not as he might have wished it to be. You will not receive the certainty you're waiting for before you begin. The clarity comes after the first step, not before it. You build confidence by moving through the unknown, not by resolving it from a distance. Whatever it is that you've been waiting to feel ready for, you are as ready now as you are likely to get. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not filled by preparation, it is filled by motion. 20. The belief that you are too far gone to begin again. This is the last thing on the list, and in many ways the most important, because it is the belief that, if left unchallenged, makes all the others irrelevant. You may have spent years living in ways that don't reflect who you want to be, accumulating habits you're not proud of, relationships that diminished you, choices that moved you away from yourself rather than toward. And now, surveying the distance between where you are and where you want to be, some part of you has quietly concluded that it's too late, that you've used up too much time, made too many wrong turns, allowed too much to calcify into permanence. This belief is understandable. It is also wrong. Seneca wrote in one of his most quietly devastating observations that we lose the present by worrying about the future and mourning the past, and that the life we have is actually sufficient for a good life if only we know how to use it. Not the life we wish we'd started earlier, not the life we might have had with different choices. This life, now. The Stoics did not believe in irredeemable people. They believed in the always available possibility of return, to reason, to virtue, to a life more aligned with what is genuinely good. Not because the past could be undone, but because the present could always be chosen differently. You are not too far gone. You are exactly as far as you are. And from here, you can begin. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but genuinely, honestly, with the full weight of your experience as context rather than condemnation. The elimination of this belief, quiet, deep, sometimes stubborn, may be the single most powerful subtraction this entire list asks of you. You've arrived at the end of the list, but that's not quite the right way to put it, because a list like this doesn't really end. It becomes a practice, a way of returning again and again to the same honest question. Is this still something I choose, or is it simply something I've stopped examining? The Stoics were not people who arrived at peace and stayed there permanently. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not as a monument to his wisdom, but as a daily practice of returning to it. Evidence that even the most disciplined mind needs repeated course corrections, repeated reminders of what matters, repeated choosing of the examined life over the default one. What you've encountered in this list isn't a checklist to be completed. It's an orientation, a way of looking at your life that keeps asking the question long after the video ends. And here's what the Stoics knew, and what you may already be beginning to feel. Subtraction is not loss. The relationships that drain you, when they're released, what opens is room for ones that restore. The need to explain yourself. When it dissolves, what emerges is a quiet authority you didn't know you possessed. The version of success that was never yours when it's surrendered. What becomes possible is the terrifying and exhilarating freedom of building something genuine. Each elimination creates space, And space, genuine, open, uncluttered space, is not emptiness. It is potential. It is the condition that makes growth possible. You cannot plant something in ground that is already packed solid with what came before. This is not a comfortable process. Real subtraction rarely is. You will release some things and feel immediate relief. Others will leave a tenderness, an ache, because not everything that weighs you down is without meaning. Some of it mattered once. Some of it still matters in complicated ways. The Stoics didn't ask you to pretend otherwise. They asked only that you be honest about whether what you're holding is still serving your life or simply occupying the space where your life could be. There is also this: you don't have to do it all at once. The person who reads a list of 20 things and attempts to eliminate all of them simultaneously is likely to eliminate none of them with any real depth. Choose one, the one that resonated most, the one where something in you quietly said, yes, that one, before your mind had time to argue. Start there. Give it real attention. See what shifts. Then come back for another and another. Not as a project with a deadline, but as an ongoing, gentle, honest relationship with your own life. The Stoics called this examined life the good life, not because it was comfortable or easy or free of difficulty, but because it was real. It was a life you were actually living, in full possession of your choices, rather than a life that was simply happening to you while you were busy reacting to noise. That life is available to you, not someday, now. In whatever small form is currently accessible, a boundary quietly held, a relationship gently deprioritized, a silence welcomed rather than escaped, a story about yourself loosened from its grip. You don't need more to find peace. You never did. You need the quiet courage to remove what was never really yours, to set down what you've been carrying out of habit rather than genuine choice, to stop performing the life you thought you were supposed to want, and begin, however imperfectly, living the one you actually do. Peace was always underneath it. Patient, quiet, waiting. You were just carrying too much to feel it. Start putting things down. If something on this list landed, if one of those 20 things quietly said, "That's me," leave a comment below. Just write, "I choose less." Because that's what this is, a choice, a quiet, powerful decision to stop carrying what was never really yours. And if this kind of thinking speaks to you, subscribe to the Stoic Mode and turn on notifications. There's more where this came from, and we're just getting started. Thank you for being here. Now go put something down.